The Gathering Storm. The Galactic Quorum, an alliance of the most powerful alien civilizations in the known universe, gathered in the grand chamber aboard the massive space station orbiting the gas giant. The meeting was unlike any other, with a tension that even the most experienced diplomats could feel. It wasn't a typical dispute about borders or trade. No, this was something much darker. The topic of discussion: humanity. Seated around a long, glowing table, the alien leaders represented different species, each with their own experiences and biases. Tall, insect-like beings from the race clicked their mandibles in agitation. The towering, known for their brute strength and tactical prowess, crossed their thick arms, while the slender, telepathic silently communicated with each other, avoiding eye contact with the others. The council speaker, a wise and ancient creature from the species, stood up. His silver robes shimmered under the dim lights. "We face a growing threat," he said, his voice resonating through the hall. "The Terran's humans have expanded too far, too fast. They are unpredictable, reckless, and worse, they thrive in conflict. If we do not act now, we may soon lose control of the balance in this galaxy." The statement stirred murmurs throughout the chamber. The Quorum had dealt with threats before, but none quite like this. Humanity was different. Their rise was rapid, their adaptability unmatched. Most species took centuries to develop space travel, but the humans had done it in a fraction of that time. They were already colonizing planets, building advanced ships, and forming alliances with other species. To the Quorum, they were a wild card, a force too dangerous to ignore. A hulking general stood up. His deep, rumbling voice echoed as he spoke. "They may be clever, but they are not invincible. We have greater numbers, superior technology, and control over vast resources. What can a few rogue Terran colonies do against the might of the Quorum?" The speaker raised a hand to silence him. "Do not underestimate them." That is exactly what the collective did, and look where they are now scattered. They're in ruins after a single skirmish with a Terran fleet. Grunted but said nothing more. The room grew quiet as the, who rarely spoke aloud, let their thoughts flow telepathically into the minds of the other leaders. Their collective message was simple: the humans are not like the others. They think differently. Their strength lies in their unpredictability and their relentless spirit. On the far side of the room, a diplomat leaned forward, clicking her mandibles thoughtfully. "Then what do you propose, Speaker? Should we strike first? Remove the Terran threat before they grow any stronger?" The speaker sighed deeply, his ancient eyes filled with weariness. "That may be our only option. But know this: a war with humanity will not be like any war we fought before. They will not fight by the rules we are accustomed to. They will defy all logic, all reason, and when pushed into a corner, they will strike harder than we can imagine." As the council members considered the speaker's words, far across the galaxy, Earth's leaders had already caught wind of the Quorum's plans. Hidden within the sprawling megacities of Earth, a small group of Terran strategists gathered in an underground bunker. They were fully aware of the growing tension between humanity and the Quorum. Admiral Sarah Knight, the head of Earth's defense fleet, stood before a massive holographic display of the galaxy, her expression grim. "The Quorum's preparing for something. We don't have all the details yet, but it's clear they're not happy with how quickly we've been advancing." Beside her, Lieutenant Jason Hale, her trusted second-in-command, tapped on the holographic controls, zooming in on the regions of space where human colonies were most vulnerable. "They'll target our outer colonies first," he said. "They think we're weak out there." Admiral Sarah Knight, the head of Earth's defense fleet, stood before a massive holographic display of the galaxy, her expression grim. "The Quorum's preparing for something. We don't have all the details yet, but it's clear they're not happy with how quickly we've been advancing." Beside her, Lieutenant Jason Hale, her trusted second-in-command, tapped on the holographic controls, zooming in on the regions of space where human colonies were most vulnerable. "They'll target our outer colonies first," he said. "They think we're weak out there." Sarah smirked. "Let them think that. We've been preparing for this for years. They have no idea what's coming. The Quorum might have been larger and more advanced, but the humans had something far more dangerous: determination. Where other species fought for resources or dominance, humanity fought for survival, for the very essence of their existence. And when humans were pushed to the brink, they became more than just soldiers. They became a force of nature. "The storm is coming," Sarah whispered, her eyes locked on the glowing star systems displayed before her. "But this time, we're ready." The gathering storm was not just one of warships and weapons. It was a collision of ideologies, of species, and most importantly, of survival instincts. Both sides believed they had what it took to win, but only one would come out victorious. The Quorum thought they understood war, but they were about to learn a harsh lesson: humans fought differently. They didn't just survive, they endured. And when the time came, they would show the galaxy exactly what that meant. The stage was set, and the galaxy held its breath for what was to come: first strike. The Quorum, after much deliberation, chose a decisive course of action. Strike first, and strike hard. The plan was to catch humanity off guard by launching an overwhelming assault on one of their outer colonies, the planet Taros IV. A human settlement on the fringes of Terran space was selected as the target. To the Quorum, it appeared isolated and poorly defended, an easy mark to send a message. The attack fleet, a formidable armada of warships from various member species, gathered in the void. Dozens of sleek, armored vessels floated in perfect formation, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to overwhelm any defenses they might encounter. At the center of the fleet was the flagship, a massive dreadnought that served as the symbol of the Quorum's power. General, the leader, stood on the command deck of his eyes focused on the tactical readouts. Beside him, the speaker, who had insisted on observing the battle firsthand, waited silently. Confidence was unshaken. "Taros IV will fall in a matter of hours," rumbled, his voice filled with certainty. "The humans may be resilient, but they cannot stand against this." The speaker nodded but remained cautious. "Do not forget that this is only the beginning. We must be prepared for what comes after. The humans will not take this lightly." Meanwhile, on Taros IV, the humans had already detected the incoming fleet. Alarms blared across the colony's capital city as the Planetary Defense Force scrambled to prepare for the inevitable assault. Taros IV was not a heavily militarized world, but its people had been preparing for the possibility of conflict ever since rumors of the Quorum's displeasure began to spread. Commander Ilara Kane, the head of Taros IV's defense, stood on the observation deck of the colony's central command tower, watching the sky. She knew the odds were against them. The Quorum fleet was far superior in terms of size and firepower, and while Taros IV had a few defense platforms and fighters, they were no match for the armada approaching. "They'll be here soon," said Captain Davis, her second in command, as he studied the data coming in from the colony sensors. "Our defenses won't hold for long against a force that size." Ilara nodded, her face set in grim determination. "We're not here to win a battle. We're here to survive long enough for help to arrive." The colony had sent a distress signal to Earth hours ago, but it was unclear when if reinforcements would arrive. Ilara knew they had to hold out as long as possible. Every minute they delayed the enemy's advance gave humanity time to respond. As the Quorum fleet drew closer, the colony's defense platforms powered up, their weapons aimed at the approaching warships. The first wave of enemy fighters screamed through the atmosphere, their sleek forms cutting through the sky like blades. Explosions lit up the air as the platforms fired, striking down a few of the incoming ships, but it was clear that the colony's defenses were outmatched. In the heart of the battle, General watched with satisfaction as his forces began to overwhelm the humans. "Their defenses are crumbling," he growled, his sharp teeth bared in a grin. "They won't last much longer." But just as the Quorum forces pressed their advantage, something unexpected happened. From deep space, a human fleet emerged. They weren't the massive dreadnoughts or cruisers the Quorum had expected. Instead, the ships were smaller, more agile, and vastly outnumbered. However, these were not ordinary vessels. They belonged to Earth's elite task force, a group known for its unconventional tactics and strategic brilliance. Admiral Sarah Knight had arrived. On board the Sovereign, the lead ship of the task force, Admiral Knight stood calmly as her crew worked around her. She had been tracking the Quorum's movements and knew they would target an outer colony. Taros IV had been the most likely target. Now she was here to stop them. "They don't know what's coming," Sarah said with a small smile as she watched the Quorum fleet on the tactical display. "They think they're fighting a traditional battle, but we'll show them how humans fight." Her fleet of fast attack ships darted in and out of the Quorum's ranks, striking from unexpected angles, and then disappearing before the enemy could retaliate. The Quorum warships, built for overwhelming frontal assaults, struggled to keep up with the nimble human vessels. Inside, the grin vanished as he watched the battle take a sudden turn. "What is this? Where did they come from?" he growled, slamming a fist onto the command console. The speaker remained calm, his ancient eyes studying the display. "I warned you, General. The humans fight differently. We cannot underestimate them." Despite the Quorum's superior numbers, the human fleet began to pick apart their formation. One by one, the Quorum ships faltered under the relentless assault, their shields failing as human torpedoes found their marks. The tide of the battle had shifted. On the ground, Commander Ilara Kane watched in awe as the human fleet arrived, their ships weaving through the sky like predators. "They're here," she whispered, a sense of hope swelling in her chest. The first strike had begun, but it was not the easy victory the Quorum had anticipated. Humanity had come to fight, and they were just getting started. Humanity strikes back. The Quorum's first assault on Taros IV had been brutal, but the human defenders held their ground far longer than anyone expected. The surprise arrival of Admiral Sarah Knight's task force had turned the tide, buying the colony precious time. Yet this was just the beginning of humanity's response. Admiral Knight knew they couldn't stay on the defensive forever. If the Quorum thought they could intimidate humanity into submission, they were gravely mistaken. It was time for humanity to take the fight to the enemy. Back on Earth, the Terran High Command convened in a secret underground bunker. The room buzzed with activity as generals and strategists reviewed reports from the battle. Holographic displays lit up the chamber, showing real-time data on the Quorum fleet's movements. At the head of the table sat General Marcus Hale, an imposing figure with graying hair and sharp, calculating eyes. "The Quorum underestimated us," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Now we strike back. This isn't just about defending Taros IV anymore. This is about showing the Quorum and the galaxy what happens when you challenge humanity." Beside him, Fleet Admiral Iris Tanaka nodded. "We've been tracking their fleet movements. They're regrouping near the Zenith Nebula, likely preparing for another strike. If we hit them now, we can catch them off guard." General Hale's eyes narrowed as he considered the plan. "And you're sure about this? Their main fleet will be there." Admiral Tanaka brought up a map of the region. "Yes, we've confirmed their forces are gathering there. If we strike fast and hard, we can cripple their war efforts in one blow." General Hale leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the table. "Then we proceed. We'll deploy the Grande Royale-class cruisers. The Quorum won't know what hit them." The Grande Royale-class cruisers were humanity's most advanced warships, equipped with experimental technology that was kept a closely guarded secret. Only a few of these massive ships had been built, and they had never been used in combat. This would be their first mission, a bold gamble to turn the tide of the war. On board the Aegis, the flagship of the fleet, Admiral Knight prepared her crew for the mission ahead. The atmosphere on the bridge was tense, but there was also a sense of determination. Everyone knew what was at stake. Admiral Knight addressed her officers. "We've been through the worst before, but this time, we're taking the fight to them. They think they're untouchable, but they've never faced ships like ours. Stay sharp. We have one chance to make this count. The fleet, led by the Grande Royal-class cruisers, entered warp space, heading straight for the Zenith Nebula. The journey was brief, but every second felt like an eternity as they approached their destination. The tension in the air was palpable. As the human fleet emerged from warp, the nebula stretched before them, a swirling cloud of vibrant gases and charged particles. It was a dangerous region of space, where visibility was low and sensors were unreliable. But this worked in humanity's favor. Admiral Knight scanned the horizon. Activate stealth systems. Let's get in close before they know we're here. The Grande Royal-class cruisers, with their advanced cloaking technology, disappeared from sight, slipping through the nebula like shadows. The rest of the fleet followed, using the cover of the nebula to mask their approach. Inside the nebula, the Quorum fleet was scattered, still reorganizing after their failed attack on Taros IV. They had no idea the humans were already upon them. In the command center of the Quorum flagship, the general paced impatiently. "What's taking so long?" He barked at his officers. "We need to strike again before the humans regroup." Suddenly, the tactical officer's console lit up with alarms. "General, we have unidentified contacts closing in fast." Turned, his eyes widening in surprise. "What? Where?" Before anyone could respond, the human fleet struck. The Grande Royal-class cruisers decloaked, unleashing a devastating barrage of firepower. Beams of energy and high-velocity projectiles tore through the Quorum ships, shredding their defenses in seconds. "Impossible!" roared, watching as his fleet was ripped apart. How did they? The answer came in the form of another explosion, as one of his cruisers was obliterated by the Aegis. The Quorum ships scrambled to respond, but the humans were too fast, too precise. Their formation collapsed into chaos as the human fleet weaved between them, cutting through their ranks with deadly efficiency. Admiral Knight remained calm, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Focus fire on their command ships. Take out their leadership, and the rest will fall apart." The battle raged on, but it was clear the Quorum was outmatched. Their fleet, once a symbol of their dominance, was now in ruins. For the first time, they faced an enemy they couldn't overpower with sheer numbers or brute force. On the bridge of the rage boiled over. He slammed his fists into the console, furious at the turn of events. "This isn't over," he growled. "We'll crush them yet." But deep down, he knew the truth. Humanity had struck back, and they had done so with a vengeance. As the last of the Quorum ships fell, Admiral Knight gave the order to withdraw. They had sent their message loud and clear. The Quorum now understood. Humanity was not a species to be, a deadly alliance. With the Quorum fleet in disarray, humanity's victory at the Zenith Nebula sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Word of the Grande Royal-class cruisers' devastating power spread fast, and many began to wonder if the Quorum's seemingly unstoppable expansion was about to meet its match. Yet, while humanity celebrated its victory, forces elsewhere were moving in ways no one could have predicted. In the cold, distant reaches of the galaxy, a council convened. It was not the Galactic Council, where diplomacy and trade were the usual topics of discussion, but a more secretive gathering, one where ancient, powerful species deliberated on matters that could change the fate of the universe. This was the Inner Ring Alliance, a shadowy group of species who had maintained a delicate balance of power for millennia, manipulating conflicts from the shadows to maintain control. The Quorum had always been useful to the Inner Ring, an aggressive force to destabilize regions and keep potential threats at bay. But humanity's recent victory had upset the balance. The humans had not only survived the Quorum's onslaught, but they had turned the tide in their favor with technology that no one had expected them to possess. This was a threat to the Inner Ring's long-standing control, and they could not allow it to go unchecked. A figure at the head of the table, shrouded in darkness, spoke in a low, gravelly voice. Humanity's rise must be stopped before it becomes unstoppable. Another figure, a being with glowing, serpentine eyes, hissed in agreement. They are unpredictable, too resilient. The Quorum failed. Now we must take action. The decision was made. The Inner Ring Alliance would form a secret pact with the Quorum, supplying them with advanced weaponry and knowledge in exchange for their loyalty and continued aggression toward humanity. The Quorum, humiliated by their defeated Synth, eagerly accepted. Revenge burned in their veins, and they would do anything to regain their lost honor. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was unaware of the growing threat. The Terran High Command continued to push their advantage, securing key outposts and preparing for the next stage of the war. But something was nagging at Admiral Sarah Knight. Back aboard the Aegis, she paced in her quarters, reviewing the data from the Zenith battle over and over again. They had won a decisive victory, but something about the Quorum's retreat didn't sit right with her. They had withdrawn too quickly, too easily. As she pondered the situation, a message came through from Admiral Tanaka. "Sarah, we've received some disturbing intelligence. There's been movement along the borders of the Inner Ring. Something's not right." Knight's brow furrowed. The Inner Ring. What do they have to do with this? Tanaka's voice was grim. "I don't know yet, but the timing is suspicious. The Quorum is regrouping, and we've picked up traces of energy signatures that match Inner Ring tech. If they formed an alliance..." Knight's heart sank. The Inner Ring Alliance was one of the oldest and most powerful factions in the galaxy, far more technologically advanced than even the Quorum. If they were involved, the war was about to take a dangerous turn. "We need to prepare for the worst," Knight said. "Get the fleet ready. If they come for us, we'll be ready." But even as she gave the order, she knew the situation was far more perilous than they could anticipate. The Inner Ring was not just another enemy, they were masters of manipulation, pulling strings behind the scenes. If they had allied with the Quorum, humanity would be fighting an enemy unlike any they had faced before. Across the galaxy, in the Quorum's capital, General Thrax stood before a council of his own. The room was filled with the towering figures of the Quorum elite, their faces twisted in anger and frustration over the recent defeat. But Thrax's expression was one of calm confidence. "We may have lost at Zenith," he said, his voice steady, "but we have gained something far more valuable." He gestured toward a large hologram behind him, showing schematics of advanced weaponry and technology, the fruits of their new alliance with the Inner Ring. "With this," Thrax continued, "we will crush the humans. We will erase their victories and bring their species to its knees. They have no idea what's coming." The Quorum Council members leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with newfound hope and hunger for revenge. The Inner Ring's technology was far beyond anything humanity had encountered. With these new weapons, they could not only retake the Zenith Nebula, but push deep into human territory, destroying their colonies and bringing Earth itself to heel. As Thrax left the council chamber, a smile crept across his face. The humans had humiliated him, but soon they would pay the price. The Inner Ring's power, combined with the Quorum's ruthlessness, would bring an end to humanity's rise. Back aboard the Aegis, Admiral Knight watched the stars streak by as the ship traveled through warp space. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. The victory at Zenith had been too easy, too clean. And now, with the growing rumors of the Inner Ring's involvement, she knew they were on the brink of something far larger than a war with the Quorum. This was a battle for survival against powers that had been pulling the strings of the galaxy for eons. Humanity would have to face enemies far older, far more cunning, and far more powerful than they had ever imagined. But if there was one thing humanity had proven time and again, it was their ability to defy the odds. And Knight was determined to lead them through whatever storm was coming. The war was far from over, it was only just beginning. The silent betrayal. The alliance between the Quorum and the Inner Ring had already started to bear fruit. New ships, larger and more dangerous than anything the humans had faced before, were being constructed in secret. Weapons that could tear through humanity's defenses like tissue paper were loaded onto these vessels, while elite crews trained in deadly new tactics. However, no one outside the Alliance had the faintest idea of the peril that awaited. Admiral Sarah Knight, now leading humanity's largest fleet, had grown increasingly restless. Despite the calm following the victory at Zenith Nebula, her instincts told her that the storm was far from over. Every piece of intelligence, every intercepted signal pointed to something lurking beneath the surface. But so far, none of it made sense. Meanwhile, General Thrax of the Quorum stood in the heart of the Inner Ring's main base. The underground complex, hidden within a distant, icy planet on the outskirts of the galaxy, was a marvel of technology far surpassing anything the Quorum had ever seen. Towering machines hummed, churning out weapons that would soon be used against the humans. Standing beside Thrax was an Inner Ring commander, one of the serpentine beings who had orchestrated much of the galaxy's hidden wars. Soon, the commander hissed, "Your people will have the power they need to erase the human threat. But remember, this power is on loan. You serve us now." Nodded, but resentment brewed deep inside him. The Quorum had always prided itself on its strength, its independence. To now be indebted to another race, even one as powerful as the Inner Ring, was a bitter pill to swallow. But he had no choice. If he wanted revenge on humanity, he needed the Inner Ring's technology. In orbit above Earth, the Terran High Command had been monitoring the galaxy's movements closely. Reports came in from distant colonies, detailing unusual energy readings, strange encounters with ships that did not belong to any known faction. It wasn't long before the pieces began to fit together. Admiral Knight received the call late at night. The voice on the other end was urgent, breathless. "We found something, Admiral. It's bigger than we thought." Knight immediately rushed to the war room, where a group of intelligence officers had gathered. On the central screen, a series of reports from across human space were displayed. One officer, a young lieutenant, stepped forward. "We've been detecting increased activity along the border regions for some time, but we couldn't figure out what was causing it. Then we intercepted this." He tapped the screen, and a garbled message played. It was in the Quorum's language, but the tone was unmistakable fear. "They're preparing for something," Knight said, narrowing her eyes. "What's the connection to the Inner Ring?" The lieutenant hesitated. "That's the part we're still piecing together. But we've picked up energy signatures that match Inner Ring technology. We think they're working together." Knight's stomach sank. The worst-case scenario had come true. The Quorum, now backed by the power of the Inner Ring, posed a threat unlike any humanity had ever faced. "How long do we have before they make their move?" The lieutenant glanced at the other officers before responding. "It's hard to say, but not long." The realization hit Knight hard. The fleet wasn't ready. Humanity had barely recovered from the last battle, and now they were facing a coalition of their deadliest enemies. She had to act fast. "We need to rally every available ship," Knight said, her voice steely. "Get the colonies prepared for an attack, and send out a team find out where they're building these new ships. If we don't stop them now, it'll be too late." At the same time, deep within Quorum space, Thrax's plans were shifting. As much as he craved humanity's destruction, he began to see the cost of his deal with the Inner Ring. They controlled the technology, they dictated the terms, and the Quorum was little more than a puppet. That would not stand. In secret, began communicating with certain factions within his own ranks, those who believed in the Quorum's independence and sovereignty. He knew that once the humans were destroyed, the Inner Ring would turn on the Quorum next. They couldn't be trusted. It was a betrayal waiting to happen. But for now, played the obedient servant. He would use the Inner Ring's weapons to wipe out the humans, but he was already preparing for the next war, the one against his supposed allies. Back on Earth, Admiral Knight and her team were scrambling to put together a defense, but time was running out. The Quorum's fleet, now powered by Inner Ring technology, was almost ready. When they struck, it would be swift and brutal. Yet, in a twist of fate, It would not be the Quorum's betrayal of the inner ring that would spark the final battle. It would be a single human ship sent on a reconnaissance mission to the edge of Quorum space that would uncover the secret alliance, and with it, the key to shattering the coalition before it could strike. The game was no longer just about ships and weapons. It was about secrets, betrayals, and the fragile alliances that held the galaxy together. Humanity's survival now depended on their ability to navigate this web of deceit and act before the storm descended. The Battle of Betrayals. As the first human reconnaissance ship silently approached the edge of Quorum space, Lieutenant Ethan Rhodes, the ship's commanding officer, stared at the readings in disbelief. The energy signatures were off the charts. Quorum and Inner Ring ships were amassing in a secret fleet yard, preparing for a full-scale assault. "This is bigger than we thought," Rhodes murmured to his crew. "We need to get this data back to command immediately." But before they could turn back, alarms blared. A Quorum patrol had picked up their presence. "Sir, we've been detected," one of the officers yelled, their hands flying across the control panels. Rhodes gritted his teeth. "Evade them. Get us out of here." The small human vessel darted between asteroids, trying to shake the Quorum fighters on their tail. They managed to avoid the initial blasts, but the enemy was relentless. The human crew worked in unison, their adrenaline surging as they narrowly avoided death with each passing second. "We've got to jump out of here," Rhodes barked. "Coordinates are locked in. Ready to jump in 3, 2, 1. The ship disappeared just as a volley of energy beams crashed into the spot they had occupied. They had barely made it out alive, but the crucial intelligence they carried would change the course of the war. Back on Earth, Admiral Sarah Knight reviewed the data from the reconnaissance mission. Her worst fears were confirmed. The Quorum had formed a secret alliance with the Inner Ring, and their combined fleet was preparing to attack in days, if not hours. Knight's gaze hardened as she turned to her officers. "We can't wait for them to strike. We have to take the fight to them." The entire human fleet was mobilized. Every ship, from the smallest frigate to the largest dreadnought, was called into action. The Battle of Betrayals was about to begin. As the humans prepared for war, tensions simmered within the Quorum ranks. General Thrax had been playing both sides for weeks, pretending loyalty to the Inner Ring while secretly planning to betray them. He knew the moment was approaching where his double-dealing would be exposed. He had to act quickly if he wanted to survive, and turn the tables on his so-called allies. In the cold depths of space, the Quorum fleet gathered alongside the Inner Ring's imposing warships. Thousands of ships stretched across the black void, ready to strike at the heart of humanity. Yet, beneath the surface, mistrust festered. Thrax had carefully cultivated a faction of Quorum loyalists, warriors who believed in their independence and resented the Inner Ring's dominance. They waited for his signal, prepared to turn against their supposed allies at the critical moment. The Inner Ring's commander, a towering, serpentine figure named Salix, was completely unaware of Thrax's betrayal. As far as Salix was concerned, the Quorum was nothing more than a useful tool to crush humanity and secure the galaxy for their empire. However, Thrax's resolve was clear. He was not a tool, and the Quorum would not be anyone's puppet. He would use the Inner Ring's strength to destroy the humans, and then he would sever his alliance with them in the most violent way possible. As the human fleet approached the Quorum Inner Ring armada, the tension was palpable. Knight stood at the helm of her flagship, her face set in determination. She knew the odds were against them. The combined strength of the Quorum and Inner Ring fleets was overwhelming, but there was no turning back now. "Admiral, the enemy fleet is in sight," one of her officers reported. Knight stared at the holographic display of the approaching armada. "We knew this day would come," she said quietly. "Prepare all forces for engagement. We fight for the survival of our species." The Battle of Betrayals erupted in a blaze of light and fury as human ships charged headlong into the enemy fleet. Explosions rippled through space as lasers and missiles collided with shields, tearing through hulls and sending ships spiraling into destruction. Despite their bravery, the human fleet struggled to hold its ground. The Quorum inner ring forces were far too powerful, and Knight could see the writing on the wall. But she had a plan, one that relied on exploiting the cracks in the enemy alliance. Meanwhile, within the Quorum fleet, loyalists were making their move. Just as the battle reached its peak, they struck from within, turning their weapons on the inner ring ships. The betrayal was swift and brutal. Inner ring vessels were torn apart by the sudden onslaught, their commanders caught completely off guard. Roared in rage as he realized the Quorum had turned against him. Traitors, he bellowed over the, "You will burn for this." Voice crackled over the communication channel, calm and resolute. "You should have known better." The Quorum bows to no one. With the inner ring ships now under attack from both humans and Quorum rebels, the balance of power shifted. Knight saw her chance. All ships target the inner ring vessels. Ignore the Quorum. We'll let them tear each other apart. The human fleet pivoted, unleashing a concentrated barrage on the already battered inner ring warships. One by one, the once mighty vessels exploded in fiery plumes, their power disintegrating under the combined assault. In the chaos, watched as the inner ring's empire crumbled before his eyes. He had played his part perfectly, using their strength to eliminate humanity's biggest threat. Now he would deal with the humans on his own terms. As the battle raged on, the galaxy held its breath. Betrayals had been exposed, alliances shattered, and the future of the stars now rested on the final moments of this bloody conflict. A galaxy. The aftermath of the battle of betrayals left the vast expanse of space littered with the remains of ships from all sides. Human, Quorum, and inner ring vessels alike floated in silent testimony to the chaos and destruction that had unfolded. But the war was not over, not yet. Now, with the inner ring all but annihilated, it was time for the final confrontation between humanity and the Quorum. Admiral Sarah Knight stood aboard her flagship, looking over the tactical map. Though humanity had managed to survive the initial onslaught, the Quorum fleet, under general leadership, was still a formidable threat. And now, with no more inner ring to hold them back, they would come for Earth. "We're not done yet," Knight murmured to herself, her eyes narrowing in focus. "Prepare all remaining ships. We make our final stand here." Across the galaxy, the Quorum fleet regrouped. Thrax, now fully in control, had one last objective: to crush humanity and claim the galaxy for his people. The Quorum had proven they could betray and destroy their so-called allies, and now he intended to bring the full weight of his fleet down on Earth's defenders. As stood in the command center of his warship, he surveyed his forces. Despite the losses sustained during the betrayal of the inner ring, the Quorum still outnumbered the humans. Victory was within reach. But something tugged at mind. The humans had proven resourceful, unpredictable, and dangerous in ways he had not anticipated. And even now, as he prepared his final strike, he could not shake the feeling that there was another trap, another layer to their plans.